Hey, welcome to the show. Today we got some familiar parts back in the garage. We're going to be doing some measuring, and I'll tell you more about that after the intro. So right now we're going to turn our attention back to our 350 Chevy engine project. The block is completely disassembled, torn down, and it is ready to take to the machine shop. But I want to check the cylinder walls and see if they're in spec first. They look pretty good, and I've done a few minor measurements already, and I think I don't have to bore it. Like I said, I want to use the original pistons and not have to bore the engine to save money. And then we're going to check our cylinder heads, and we're going to check our flatness on our deck area that goes against the deck into the block. And then we're also going to check our valve guide to valve stem clearance to see if we need any valve guide replacements. So hopefully we don't need anything there either. The wear I'm seeing in this engine, I'm probably going to have to change some of the guides. If we got to do a lot of them, then I'm going to maybe look at not even doing these heads and finding an alternative source to get maybe some reman heads or even new heads, even though it's probably a little bit out of our budget. So I want to show you a little bit of what I'm talking about between valve stem and valve guide clearance with a few illustrations, and then we're going to go ahead, we'll start tearing into our cylinder heads first. So the illustration I wanted to show you is I wanted to show you what I'm doing when I'm measuring the valve stem to valve guide clearance and why it's important. So this is the valve here. I already took one out of the cylinder head, and it rides inside the cylinder head with a guide. It can be a cast. If you have a cast head, it could be a liner in there, or it's original to the head. It can be an integral part of the head that's riding inside of there. And then when you replace the guide, you're basically drilling that out, boring it, and then you're putting in basically a huge stud with a hole in it, a guide, back into the cylinder head. If you have aluminum, then you already have a liner in there because this can't ride in aluminum. It wouldn't last very long. So you can see that there's an area here where it's worn. It's about right here to here. And then when it rides in the cylinder head, the rocker actually pushes it. When the rocker moves up and down like this, the rocker arm, it actually pushes it in the guide this way. So when you measure it, you want to measure it in the movement of where it's going to go through the rocker. Now when I'm measuring top, middle, bottom, I'm measuring the top area of the stem, the valve stem here, and then the valve guide in the cylinder head. I'm measuring the center, and I'm measuring at the bottom. I'm measuring all three because it's going to have a tendency to walk, and they could all have greatly different clearances. So when I'm doing that, then I'll draw a guide here in like two parts. So this is our guide, and then this is our valve that's riding in the cylinder head. And you have a certain area of wear where it's going to wear. It's not going to wear all the way to the bottom or the top, and you got an area where it's going to wear and stop. So when I'm measuring two different things in this case. I'm measuring the valve stem and what I call a top, middle, bottom. You can even call that out. And I'm measuring the valve guide and the top, middle, bottom as well here. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to get top, middle, bottom for all 8 of these valves, all 16 of these valves, and then I'm going to subtract the differences. So I'm going to, with the intake valves, you should have anywhere from 1 to 3 thousandths, and this is the intake. And the exhaust should have, you're allowed 1 extra thousandths because of heat expansion with the exhaust valve. It's going to run hotter than the intake valve. Now always check your specs, of course, and see what the manufacturer recommends. But a good rule of thumb, especially with an old cast head like this, is again 1 to 3 thousandths clearance on the intake and 2 to 4 on the exhaust. If we have any more than out of these specs, then we're going to have the guides replaced, or if the valve stems look really, really scored, we will have to get new new valves as well, because the guides might all be scored. Typically, unless you have an oil delivery problem or something and they were really running low on oil or had different issues, these are actually, most of the time, always the valves will clean up. You just have to regrind the face and true it to the seat, which we'll talk about in another time. But most of the time you can just replace the valve. It's not a big deal. So, or you don't have to replace the valves. So you can always reuse them. So let's then, I showed you this, let's jump back onto our cylinder head and let's get ready to disassemble it. Alright, so the first thing I want to do before I do anything is I'm going to take a socket and a hammer and I'm going to tap on each one of these spring retainers. Because over time, these retainers, you have the valve and the keeper, they're stuck together and they can still stay stuck. And when you put the valve spring compressor on, it might not actually even, or be a little hard to compress. If you had a pneumatic one, it might be a little different. I have a mechanical spring compressor, so again, it could be a little difficult to do that, but it just helps break this retainer free from the keepers from being on there for so many years and miles. So I'm just going to grab an ordinary socket like this and a plastic hammer. You can use ball peen hammer as well, and just give it a tap like this. Spring will actually move a little bit, that's what you want. Alright, so then I just have a cheap valve spring compressor here. Again, this is a manual one. There's pneumatic and all different types. And just to show what I'm doing, I normally would never disassemble a head like this, but I am just going to leave it hang over a little bit like this, so I can get the spring compressor on, and you can see me take the retainer off here. And I already have this set up because I already took a valve out and another head. But this area, this goes right in the center of the valve. And this goes across the retainer on the top. You might have to adjust it. You could probably rent these in an auto parts store. But again, I would never disassemble it like this. I just want to show you what I'm doing. Go like this. Then I've compressed the valve. Now these are the keepers here. To get the keepers out, it might be a little stuck on. Well, they're stuck from oil. And then with these particular valves, they have a little pocket down there, and it's got a little tiny O-ring. And you have to get that, pop that O-ring out. It's actually a small seal. Well, it probably was an O-ring at one time. Right now it's really hard. Otherwise the valve won't be able to come out. And they did this to help the oil drain around the stem and not to go into the guide and start burning oil, but they really didn't work very well, but that was 1973 technology. So there's the seal, I'm getting that out. And of course, always, yes, you want to keep everything in order. Don't mix anything up, just like you would taking apart any part of the engine. So then I'm going to release, and I'm going to have to hold this on because the valve will fall out. Get a little bit more here. And the valve actually didn't move. So I'm going to take my spring out, and there's still part of that seal on there. You can get all of it off. So, alright, so this is the point you never want to force the valve out. This was actually going to come out, but I'm going to put a little brake cleaner and clean the varnish off. Take it out. Now you never want to force it. You can actually get little burrs where these keepers sit from very high mileage, high period, a lot of use in the car. And if you try to pull this down, if you got a burr, you're going to score the guide and probably damage it. So never force it. Now this one I got all the sludge off, like I said. This one's going to come out really nice. And we got oil on our guide, that's good. You can get all the varnish off the top. But you can see then maybe a little better. You can see the shiny areas of where that was basically riding there into the guide and where you have to measure. So now I need to clean the guide up. You want to make sure when you measure anything it's clean and of any debris and oil. So I'm just going to put a rag at the bottom, just kind of spray it out. and try to get as much debris out as I can. Couldn't find any of my rifle brushes this morning, so just have to make do with what we have. Alright, so what am I going to use to measure the guide? I'm going to use a set of small hole gauges. These you can pick up pretty reasonable. I like to stick with old stuff because if it's not broken, it's probably better than a lot of stuff you can buy today. This is an old Mitsutoyo set. And then this is the actual one that I'm going to use to measure. And then to get the actual clearance, I'm going to use a micrometer. Now you can use a course of calipers. This is more accurate. I want to go down to 4 digits past the decimal point, and I want to get a very accurate measurement using this micrometer. So then remember then I said earlier the rocker moves like this, so the valve's going to move back and forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hole gauge and I'm going to go in the center. This is what I'm going to call my top measurement, and these two expanding balls out in here are going to be across where the rocker sits. That's going to have, where the rocker moves, it's going to have the most wear. So then what I want to do with this tool is I'm just going to tighten it up just so it's a little bit snug. And I'm going to pop it out, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my measurement. So we have, looking at about 25, it's like we're looking at about 3399. So I'm going to write that measurement down, and I'm going to progress then to the middle and the bottom. So I just measured my guide in 3 places, and the measurement I gave you at the last cut, the 33 whatever that was wrong. I was looking at the wrong numbers. Maybe I'll edit it out, maybe I won't. So with the top, middle, bottom for the guide, I got these 3 values, and again it's down to the 4th digit past the decimal place. It's more accurate than using a pair of calipers. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the valve stem. So I'm going to do here is just measure top, middle, bottom, and that looks like 3412. Three, 4, 1, 2. Three, 4, 1, 0. So I got 15 more to do. I just realized I'm not going to have enough paper, so I got to go scrounge up some more paper. But this is the process, and I'm going to put these all on a sheet of paper for you, and I'll spare you the boringness of doing the math, and I will show you then everything that I calculated and see if our guides then are, and if they're good or if they're bad or anything else you might have to do with this project. So how's this for paper? So I took all my numbers, transposed them onto this large sheet, and did my math. This is my intake valves, and this is the stem, this is the guide. Figured out my math, and I figured out the clearance here. Same thing with the exhaust valves. Now using our rule of thumb for 1 to 3 thousandths clearance on the intake, and 2 to 4 thousandths clearance on the exhaust. If we look at just our max, which is 3 thousandths, This is already out because we're at 4. These are at their max. This is 5,000ths at the bottom here. So this one's out. And that's at its max. And if you look at the exhaust, we've got 3 of them have 5,000ths clearance. So those are out. Those have to be replaced, the guides. And then this is at its max here. So actually this isn't looking too good. I thought it'd be a little bit better, but getting to our max here, I really don't like that because it's not going to be a long-lasting valve job. Now I didn't use any of the decimals. I actually rounded them up. They might be like somewhere like they were 0.0025, 0.0028, but again we're getting close to our max. So we definitely need 4 guides, and if we're going to just replace them because we're getting close to our maximums, then I'll probably just go ahead and get all the valve guides replaced. Didn't want to do that. It's going to hurt into our budget, but we'll just have to live with it. Well, maybe we'll think, I'll have to look at some other alternatives, maybe what I might want to do about cylinder heads. Now, I don't think I'm even going to go ahead and I'm not going to measure the other cylinder head with the valve guide clearance, because from my experience, if you get these kind of numbers on the one head, the heads are matched. I believe they're original. The car, like I've said many times, they're going to have the same kind of numbers. So I'm just going to assume that head has got the same kind of wear, and we're just going to go ahead and get the valve guides replaced or do something different about the cylinder heads, like I said. So with that, this is done, and now we have to check the flatness of the cylinder head on the surface where the head gasket sits and where it sits on the deck on the head. So let me clean up a little bit, and then I'm going to show you then how we're going to accomplish that. So now we want to check our head here, make sure that it's flat and it's not warped. And to do that, this surface of course has got to be super clean. So I'm going to wipe it first off with brake clean, and I'm going to use these red Scotch Brights on this angle grinder. I'm going to clean this whole area up, and then I'm going to use a flat edge, something with a flat edge on it, and I'm going to use a feeler gauge to go ahead and see how flat it is. Now I know this is not a true machinist flat piece of metal and people are going to laugh at me, but it will give you some indicator if this is warped or not, and I have used this before and it saved me. This is a nice flat surface, but again it's not a true machinist flat surface. But I still probably have the machine shop check it. I just want to check it first myself, A, and B, I just want to give you an indicator of what the machine shop actually does. So I'm going to spray this down with brake clean, try to get the oil off it, because the oil will dig into those Scotch Brights and it chews up the pad pretty quick. These are supposed to be holes, and this is where the coolant sat for a very long period of time. It's actually supposed to be a big hole like there. It just sat, and then the head gasket actually you only get a little part of this with the sealing area, the head gasket, so that's another reason it kind of all sits there. It also could be not changing your coolant and letting your car go to heck, your engine not taking care of it. These other things like this can also happen, but in this case, it's probably just from the coolant sitting in there for such a long period of time without being used. So I got this cleaned up the best I can. So what I'm going to do is take this, like I said, and I'm going to clean up this surface. Well, that job was invented before fun, because it certainly wasn't. So, I got this whole surface all cleaned up. It's definitely never a fun part of the job. It's always really messy. So let's get a nice, all that gasket material and all the debris and everything's off. So what I'm going to do is take my straight edge and lay it in different parts of the head, and I'm going to see if I can get a feeler gauge under it. Now, a good rule of thumb is a cylinder head gasket can make up for about 5,000ths variation in any kind of waviness in this surface and the deck surface. Always of course check your service manual and make sure that spec is really true, or there might be some other, could be as low as 2 or 3 thousandths depending on the type of head gasket, the material the block is made out of, the head gasket material, and everything else that goes along with that. So, but for this, I'm just going to take this straight edge, and I have a 5 thousandths feeler gauge, and I'm going to see if I can get it under in these areas. And so far we're looking pretty good. Now if I could get it, I want to check it with the 6,000. And if I can get the 6,000 under, then I have too much warpage, and I definitely want to get this surface cut. So what they do is stick it on a large machine, and they run a stone across it. Or some older machines have stones, the new ones just have a flat cutting wheel or a disc or a bit. They go across and they just true this whole surface up. So let me check it in certain other positions. Yeah, see, this is what I thought. The head most likely was going to be not have any issues. So I like to check it in all these different spots and see if I can get this under here, there, here. I like to go in a bunch of different directions. So this is actually looking pretty good. So I have to clean up the other head, and then unfortunately we're going to have to do this then. We'll have to do this. You got to make sure you hold it kind of flat, or you can get an unusual reading. So unfortunately though, I got to do the same process on the cylinder, on the block. So it's going to take me a lot of work to clean those up. With this though, our heads are done. I put the valves in just to put them in so I don't have a lot of parts laying around. I didn't want to have to mix up the parts and where they're supposed to go. So these heads are okay. And the machine shop normally in a process when you exchange the heads, or if you have send them in for work, they will take all the valves out and they do the valve grind, and they don't charge you for taking the valves out. So that's why I put them all in, and I can just give them one complete unit or 2 complete units because I'm going to give them both heads. So let me go back. I'm going to go back to go over to the block, and these heads are complete done now. They go off to the machine shop. So now that we got the cylinder heads out of the way, we're going to turn our attention back to the engine block. And the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our deck surface here is completely flat. And to do that, then we're going to follow the same process we did with the cylinder heads. So I've already cleaned this up with a Scotch-Brite and got this as much of the debris off as I can. And then I'm going to go ahead and take our straight edge, and I'm going to lay it on our deck surface and use our 5 thousandths feeler gauge and go all in different areas, moving around the square, and see if I can get that 5 thousandths feeler gauge under it. And if I can't, then I'm going to do the other side, and if that checks out, then we're going to go ahead and measure the cylinder walls. So I doubt I'm going to have any problems here. I have high confidence. When I tore this engine down, it didn't have any signs of overheating or any head gasket issues. And again, from what I'm doing right now, this side looks really good. So I'm going to go ahead and go do the other side, and if it's fine, then we're going to progress to measure the cylinder taper and out of round. And to do that, I'm going to show you an illustration, and then once that's done, we're going to go ahead and measure our cylinders, and we have to do a subtraction method like we did with the valve stem to valve guide clearance, and we'll see if we're in spec or out of spec, and see if we're going to have to bore these cylinders. So to see if our cylinders in spec, we got to do 2 measurements. We got to do a taper measurement and out of round measurement. The first one I want to talk about is the out of round. So the cylinder receives the most amount of wear at the top due to the explosions of the air-fuel mixture. So if you look at the cylinder right at the top of the deck surface, but below where the ridge is, we are going to take 2 measurements, an A and a B, a difference of one side versus the other side. Here, so this will be a B and this will be an A. So when we take that, then we're going to measure subtract the 2 and compare the specs. Now, a good rule of thumb, which I'm going to use, is you don't want any more than 3 thousandths max for the out of round. But again, always check the manufacturer's specs and see what they say. If it is, we're going to have the engine board to true them up to a true circle. The next one we got to do is measure the taper. Now, the measure of taper is the difference from the top to the bottom. So if the top of the engine cylinder sees the most amount of wear, the bottom's going to see the least amount of wear. And this is a great exaggeration, of course, but taper looks something like this. And you have an A measurement and you have a B measurement. So you want to take a measurement right at the bottom and then right at the top, right below that ridge. And then subtract all these will be a B minus an A, and you get a measurement. Do that for all 8 cylinders. And you don't want any more difference than 5 thousandths. 5 thousandths max. But always check the specs. If you do, you have to have the cylinder bored again and true up the round surfaces. So by doing both of these, then we'll see if the cylinders are in spec or out of spec. If they are going to be in spec, then we can just go ahead and not have to replace anything and just use original pistons, which is my intent as we originally talked about, because I want to save money. So let's move away from this, and the first step I'm going to do is make sure the cylinders are really clean, and I'm going to get out the telescoping gauges, and then we're going to go ahead and do these measurements. I'm going to write them all down again, and we'll compare the specs. So before I take the actual measurements, I wanted to talk a little bit more about where the actual points are in the cylinder where you should be using a telescoping gauge and taking the measurements. So the first one I want to talk about then is the taper. So the piston skirt rides in these 2 areas here into the cylinder. So as the piston moves up and down, the crankshaft throw is actually moving it back and forth like this. So this is where the the other area where the most wear is going to occur. And if you see it here, this is how it's not going to ride, of course, in this exact position because it's going to be below the deck surface, but this is actually then where it's going to ride. So to take your taper measurement, you want to take it, and this area would be your top, and then directly down below, right where you see where it doesn't have hardly any wear, that's going to be the bottom measurement. Now to take the out of round position, what we're going to do then is keep that same measurement here for a B, and then we're going to subtract it from this measurement we're going to take, and remember we're going to take it right under this lip where the ridge stops, and that's going to be our A measurement. And by doing that, then we're going to be able to subtract these and get our wear on our cylinders, and hopefully we will be in spec and we won't have to do any boring into this. So let me put this piston away, and let me get out the tools that we need, and then we're going to start measuring these cylinders. So I got out the telescoping gauge here, and this is what I've been talking about, what I'm going to use, and then I have a 4 to 5 inch micrometer. So to take the taper measurement first, what I'm going to do is use the same similar process that I used for the small hole gauges, and I'm going to put this in the cylinder, and I am just going to get it so it catches on these little high spots that are in the end of the tool, and I'm going to get it just so it's snug. So like this one here, I'm just going to kind of move it around a little bit. It's a little tricky if you don't feel comfortable taking take another measurement and kind of compare the two. So I'm going to get it and I'm going to tighten it up, and I can feel it's got a little snugness to it in the cylinder. Now you can do this with a dial bore gauge. That's the more expensive option. I'm trying to show the cheaper option because you can pick up a micrometer and a telescoping gauge relatively inexpensive. And take your micrometer, and we'll see what kind of number we get. Looks like we got, sure, always a little tricky to do. Looks like we got 4.0022, which is actually a really good number. It's a good number because we know this engine has not been bored. It appears to be all stock, and a small block Chevy 350 has a 4-inch bore. So I'm going to write that number down, and remember this is our B, I can write it on the block here, for our out of round, and then this will be our A here, and then we'll need our B to measure our out of round. So we had 4.0022, And then we'll measure the other side now, same process. Get it so it's a little snug. And we've got 4.002, looks like 3. So we had a real good number there. Now let's move to the out of round. I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom. Go back and forth, measure it, tighten it up. And then not surprisingly so, this number at the bottom is 4 inches because it's never been bored. So we're going to write that number down. And then we'll figure out a little math and see where we're at. So you can see here then I got some very good numbers. So for number 1 cylinder, for the out of round, I had hardly anything. Then for the taper, a little over 2,000. So these are really good numbers. So if the rest of the cylinders check out, this will be really good. And I'm not going to get this engine bored. I'm just going to reuse the pistons. So I am going to have to grab some more paper. I don't have enough, and I'm going to continue doing the same thing on all the cylinders. And then I will write everything on a sheet of paper again, and I'll brief you what I found. So I just finished measuring all the cylinders, and I transposed them onto the sheet so you could have a better understanding of what's going on. And numbers look exceptionally well. They look much better actually than I thought they would. I thought they'd be in spec, but I didn't think they would be this good. So you can see our out around, we didn't even crack the 1/1000th of an inch mark. And on the taper, most of them are a little over 1,000ths, and then we have some in the 2,000ths range. But these are all well and in spec. They're very good numbers, so we can reuse the pistons. So there's one last thing I want to do and briefly show before we wrap up and we know what parts to take to the machine shop. And that is I want to measure my crankshaft, rod, and the main bearing journals and see which ones might be out of spec, because if they are out of spec, we're going to have to get the crank round. Now, as I spoke earlier during the teardown in another video, that everything looks really good in this, and I don't think we're going to have any issues, but you never know with the looks. You always want to take the micrometer and measure and see what everything's within specification or if it's out. Now, to do this, I'm going to take my 2 to 3 inch micrometer, and I'm going to do what we just did similar to the cylinders, and I'm going to do 2 different measurements here and here, subtract the difference. That will be your out of round for this one, and then we're going to do a here to here, subtract the difference. That is going to be the out of round for this journal, and then we're going to do that is take the highest measurement we got for this one and the lowest one for this one, or vice versa. Whatever the highest one is and the lowest one is, we're going to subtract the difference, and then that's going to be our taper, and see how much taper we have from the one to the other. Now, from my experience, these are probably going to, this is a narrower, for your main bearing, this is a narrower bearing surface, and taking it here and here, I'll probably take the 2 different measurements, but the way this looks is most likely this is going to be the same measurement from one side to the other. Where I'm most concerned about is my main bearing for my that has the widest one for my thrust bearing, and that one I'll actually do the 2 different measurements and see if it's got any taper here. So I've already showed you some measurements and how to do things, so I'm going to go ahead and start measuring my crankshaft, and then I'm going to write everything down and I'll go over the results with you when I get finished. Now I have the crankshaft in this position just to measure it, but you never want to leave the crankshaft lie like this. You always want to stand it upright. There's a potential in theory that leaving it like this could, if you're only setting it at 2 different points and it's really heavy, it could actually warp. So a word to the wise, always make sure you stand it up. Even if you're going to try to transport it or something, try to keep it up in an upright position. So I got everything filled out here. I got all my numbers, did all the measurements. Got really good numbers. We're not going to have to grind the crankshaft. We can use it as is, which is what I thought, the way it looks. But again, always measure and make sure so you know what you're working with. So you see here, we have all our out of round for our mains. They're not even at 1,000ths, which is the service limit. So if we hit 1,000ths, then we would have to actually have the crankshaft round. Now you see, I was talking about earlier, I did not write the taper down. I did the measurement, but they were about the same number, so I just didn't worry about it. So we have, really good numbers, but I did do the taper on the number 5, which is the widest main bearing, and it has the thrust washer built into it. And we only got, again, we didn't get to 1,000ths. Now the same thing then with the rod journals here. I did all the out of round measurements here. We didn't even crack 1,000ths. And then I took the largest and smallest numbers, like I was saying, subtract the differences, and again, we didn't crack the 1,000ths mark. So real good news, crankshaft is good, and now we're going to go ahead then and gather up the parts that we need that we already figured out that we have to take to the machine shop and get all squared away. So that wraps up another fantastic show. Once we get all these parts back from the machine shop, we're going to start assembling them, and I'm going to show you step by step how to rebuild your own engine. Save yourself a lot of money, and it's also a personal satisfaction of doing all this yourself. So as always, thanks for watching. Good luck with your projects, and remember, it's not a rewarding day unless you get dirty.